Hi, this is episode 5 of Medicine Confidential Research. First, I'd like to address some of the comments people made on my prior videos where I was speaking about Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. So approximately 30 to 33,000 Americans are living with ALS. There's about 5 to 6,000 new cases per year. We have 3 FDA-approved drugs, but they don't do very much, really. They slow progression, and it's a pity that Lou Gehrig, who the disease, the eponymous name Lou Gehrig's disease is named after, died almost 100 years ago, and we don't have anything more than that. Unfortunately, the life expectancy, once you're diagnosed, is only 2 to 5 years. But the question is, why don't we have anything more than that? The definition of insanity, which has been credited to Albert Einstein, is repeating the same thing, expecting a different result. If we haven't gotten a good result in this, then maybe we should look at how we're doing research. Maybe the process is flawed. Now, researchers in this country spend more than half their time writing grants, which they may or may not receive. So look at how much time is wasted. And even if they receive it, it may not be funded, which sounds ridiculous because it is ridiculous. And now much research has been cut. The funds have been withdrawn. Even people who had grants, the funds are canceled. We have the present treatments because the last generation paid it forward to us, because it takes years and years to develop a new treatment. Thomas Kuhn wrote a superb book about scientific revolution, and he says it can take 20 years for things to be instituted, and the new advance comes from the margin of the same field. It's people who aren't in the same silo thinking the same thing who are coming up with the new ideas. Doctors tend to be pigeonholed. You're a radiologist, that's all you do. You're an ophthalmologist, that's all you're doing. You're almost not allowed to look at another field, which is completely ridiculous because we all have MD degrees. I can read a scientific paper in another field as much as anybody else can. Now, yesterday, I saw a play called The Notebook, and it was very sad. It was about somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And I was very sad. Then I got very angry. Why? Because over the last 20 years, there's been more than 500 failed Alzheimer's studies. More than 99% of them have failed. And at the end of the day, we only have 2 FDA-approved drugs that slow progression in a minority of cases at great expense and have a side effect that they can kill you. When I attended the Alzheimer's meetings and everybody was dancing around with this great advance, I was just shaking my head. You have an expensive drug that can kill you that slows progression in a minority of cases. And yes, it's an advance, but not worthy doing a conga line about. But why? What I did during COVID, when elective surgery was stopped, I signed up for a PhD in business just to learn about things. And I analyzed, why were there 500 failed drug studies? Well, the average study lasted about 2 years, but what they were looking for would have taken 4 or 5. But the studies are extremely expensive, $100 million a year to do a study. So companies can't make $500 million mistakes. So they looked at a year or two, and if they didn't see anything significant, they stopped the study. Well, maybe that's part of the problem. If things are so damn expensive, then we can't find out whether a drug works. Maybe some of those 500 failed drugs did work. It just took a little longer. But part of the problem is this whole business with Alzheimer's disease. They're talking about the amyloid hypothesis, which has been called into question because these drugs that remove amyloid don't do much. They don't stop it. They don't improve upon it. In looking at Alzheimer's disease, it seems that we're standing on the sidewalk and we only know that the house is on fire when the roof collapses. Well, of course, treating at that stage would be ineffective. We need to have a smoke detector at the first sign of Alzheimer's disease because you have findings at least a decade before you have symptoms. So the point is, rather than looking at the end of a heterogeneous disease, that there are many causes that result in the amyloid and the tau, we need to look at the beginning. On an alphabetical scale from A to Z, that's a T. It's too late. That's why nobody gets better. We need to look at the beginning. Now, I have mentioned to you before, I'm a physician, I'm also an electrical engineer, and I had appointments at Harvard Medical School and at MIT. And while at MIT, I started working at a technique called dynamic light scattering spectroscopy. In fact, I published a textbook on this. And this is more than 20 years of my research, but I've developed a technique and a machine that shines a light in your eye, and I think, because this is on the basis of only 50 people, I think I can diagnose Alzheimer's disease by shining a light in your eye, and it takes 3 seconds. I know it sounds incredible. I have a company making 3 commercial prototypes right now to do much more testing at 3 separate sites. I presented this 2 years in a row at the International Alzheimer's meeting, and I'm scheduled to present it at this next meeting this coming July in London, England. I've published 4 articles now. I have 2 more submitted to the journals about this technology. Why is this so important? Because I think I can diagnose it earlier than any other test. So maybe we'll have a fighting chance to prevent the symptoms. If there's a at least 10-year time window before there are symptoms, then we have a huge window when we can treat and prevent the symptoms. Once the house has collapsed from fire, it's too late. Now, it's very expensive to do this work, and I'm told that I would need another $1 million to go through the FDA, which is another problem. Why is it so expensive? And when I've spoken to the FDA, the examiner said, we don't deal with people like you. And I said, what do you mean, people like me? I deal with big companies. Well, that's great that you're a snob, but what difference does it make where a good idea comes from? And that's part of the problem with research and grants. If you're giving out grant money, you want to show that you gave it to something worthwhile. So you only give it to people at big universities that have essentially done the work already. So you know that it works and it makes you look good. How can a grant agency give it to some guy in a private office in Florida? And then if it fails, they'll say, what are you, stupid? Why'd you give it to him? But then again, this is the answer of why we've gone so many years without anything meaningful. Why hasn't ALS been cured in the last 100 years? Why hasn't Alzheimer's been cured or prevented or ameliorated or something better than what we have now? you might wish to look at a YouTube video that was made, a patient that I treated with ALS in Dubai. And there are some Alzheimer's videos of people I've treated as well. I'm using regenerative medicine stem cells. I'll speak about this in another issue. The patients always tell me that when they see the doctor says, oh, they're working on it. Or when they show them my work, oh, there's no proof. To say there's no proof means you actually looked for proof, and these people haven't, because I've published 15 articles. You could look them up. My work is listed on clinicaltrials.gov. That's the NIH website. Patients are sent to me for my treatments from different universities and very large medical centers. And sometimes the doctor tells a patient, don't say that I sent them, because there are repercussions from his university. And I find that terrible, because they're more concerned, and I understand it, because doctors are people. They're more concerned with the repercussions from their department chairman that they sent the patient from the massive university, the Mount Olympus, to a cockroach in Florida. But you as a patient, you don't care who's helping you. And if the university can help you and somebody else can, that's all you care about. I mean, we really must think about the patient and their family. And that's what the play yesterday, first I was sad, then I was angry. It shouldn't be this way. It should not be this way. I mean, all these insurance companies are always advertising, and the drug companies are advertising, but the host of side effects for drugs that barely work, I mean, are ridiculous. When you see a doctor, there's a bell-shaped curve of doctors, and, for a routine thing, anybody within the bell is fine. But if you have something significant or life-threatening, you need to go to the edge. You need to go the tail of the bell-shaped curve. Yesterday, when the husband mentions that his wife put the iron in the refrigerator twice, I heard people laugh. But it wasn't a belly laugh. It was the uncomfortable laugh of people who have experienced this and lived through this. So I welcome your questions. I learn from your questions. I've learned from your questions. I've also learned that where the heck did my hairline go by looking at these videos. Medicine has changed. Doctors don't have time. I recently spoke to a urologist who told me that when he sees prostate cancer, it's much more advanced than it used to be. Why is that? Because the doctors are not doing rectal exams anymore. They're relying upon blood tests, but not everybody with prostate cancer has an increased PSA. And the problem is that people like me who are telling you what's going on get attacked. And I expected this. I've done this when I've done other research too. As a result of the studies I do, I get records from all around the world. And sometimes it's just clear that the patient is being taken advantage of. They're getting injections into their eyes that they never needed. They're still getting injections. They never see the doctor. He just runs in, gives the injection. Then I get a telephone call. How dare you take away my money? You're taking food out of my kid's mouth. I said, well, your kids are starving? That you have to inject a 92-year-old woman every month? And you give them 25 injections for something that never needed an injection in the first place? And then they say something, really nasty and filthy to me and hang up. But that's reality. Doctors are people too. So I hope you got something out of this, and any questions, feel free to comment. Thank you.